Welcome, Hoosier fans, to another special edition off-season episode of the Assembly Call. Very, very excited to be here talking with you tonight, or wherever and whenever you're listening to the Assembly Call on the podcast. I'm your host, Jared Morris. We have a full house tonight. Our entire crew is here: Ryan Phillips, Andy Bottoms, and Will DeWitt, and we have a very special guest. Kent Sterling is joining us. He, of course, is the host of the Kent Sterling Show on CBS Sports 1430 in Indianapolis. He is the hardest-working media personality in Indianapolis, and we're very excited to have him with us. I am fortunate enough to do a weekly segment on Kent's show, and so it's going to be very nice to turn the tables now and be able to ask questions to Kent, and so we will get to that here in just a moment. But to begin, as we always do, we will go around the horn, get the latest thoughts from our team here. And for me, my banner moment to kick things off, I was reflecting earlier today as we are now obviously past the Indiana-Kentucky high school all-star game, which Indiana won again. And it was just a testament to the great talent that is in the state of Indiana. Certainly the 2017 class, guys like Chris Wilkes and Paul Scruggs. The 2018 class with guys like Romeo Langford. And I saw Mike Pregram tweet out earlier today, this was the first day that players from the class of 2018 could be contacted. Indiana was one of the teams to contact Romeo, which is great. And something Kent and I have talked about on his show is the importance of Indiana landing some of these players. And when you go back and look at the rosters of Indiana teams that have won national championships, you will not be surprised to know that they are littered with guys from Indiana. And it's not just guys at the end of the bench. All of those teams had guys who played prominent roles who were from the state of Indiana. The 1940 team, almost the entire roster is from Indiana. The 53 team, you had Don Schlunt and Bobby Leonard from Indiana. The 76 team, Bobby Wilkerson, Tom Abernathy, Kent Benson, Wayne Radford, all from Indiana. The 81 team, Randy Whitman, Ted Kitchell, Landon Turner, Ray Tolbert, Steve Bushy, all from Indiana. The 87 team actually only had a couple of players from Indiana, but of course one of them was Steve Alford, the engine that made that team go. And if we look at even more recent teams that were very, very good but didn't win the title, the 2002 team had Jeffries, Coverdale, Odell. The 2013 team, Zeller, Hulls, Farrell, Elston. We know that Indiana teams, great Indiana teams, are built on the backs of Indiana players, and it's exciting to see now the talent in the state of Indiana. Now it's up to the Hoosiers and Tom Crean to land these players, and the reason why I'm so excited and enthusiastic and optimistic is it looks like Indiana's in a good position with a lot of these guys. With another good season this year, some strong recruiting by Tom Crean, hopefully we can land some of these guys and be on track to hang banner number 6. So that's my banner moment for tonight. Let's go around the horn. Ryan has what he's promoting as an epic rant, so we look forward to that. But we'll start real quick with Andy and his bottoms line.
I'll try to be short and sweet just so we can get to this rant. I mean, I think this is the time of year when there's really not a whole lot on TV. I was kind of flipping through while we were getting ready to get started here. There's no NHL is over. Finals game isn't on until tomorrow. There's just not a lot going on, which is probably why over the last couple of weeks I've started looking at basketball rosters and starting to think about what the next season might look like. So I think it's reached that point where we're not quite to the midway point between the end of the season and the point when practice starts, but it is definitely kind of the doldrums to a certain extent. So maybe I need to get more into recruiting, but it's definitely exciting. This is the time of year that I start really missing basketball as we kind of get to the dead heat of summer and all those kinds of things. So starting to look through rosters and things like that for next year at least kind of holds me over until then. I have not delved into any kind of preseason bracketology yet, though. I haven't become quite that much of a degenerate just yet, but my daughter's softball season will be over here in the next couple weeks, so that may not be too long to follow. By the time that gets done, I'll have that much more free time, I guess, to figure out what we're gonna do. But now it's been kind of same as last time, fairly uneventful off season, just waiting out these long summer months until we get back to it. So nice to have an every couple week chance to talk IU hoops.
All right, Ryan, it's time for your rant. An act of theft has happened. It's time for you to regulate.
Okay, so as many of you know, sometime around January, maybe December, I called Max Bielfeldt better than advertised Bielfeldt. That was just sort of my thing, and I think I mentioned that every single episode from then on out, and then we named a friggin' book after it, as Jared is holding up right now. That was kind of my thing this year. I was really excited about it, And today, this was apparently from 2 months ago, but Jared pointed it out to me that a writer for FanSided's Indiana site wrote an article called Max Bielfeldt Season Recap, Better Than Advertised. No attribution, nothing. Edward Compton, I think his name is a student in the class of 2019, so I'm not going to be too harsh on him, but come on, dude. I just...
We could probably get the interns to hunt him down on campus, I would imagine.
This is theft. We need some old school Italian sort of action here, you know? But the reason why I was most upset was the crime to journalism done in the first sentence of this piece. It took only one season for Max Bielfeldt to melt the heartstrings of the Hoosier faithful. Kids, you're mixing metaphors there. You don't melt heartstrings. You pull heartstrings or you melt hearts. It's one of the two. Okay? That to me is the more egregious crime here. Also, and the final sentence, he's saying that that the Hoosier faithful should be appreciative of his efforts and that they should also be appreciative of his sisters. Come on, no, we're not doing this. We're not going to go in that direction, son. So attribution. That was clearly my thing. Come on, give me a little credit. B, work on the metaphors and cliches. You're overdoing it and mixing too much. And C, leave his sisters out of this. All right, that's my job, not yours. All right. So yeah, that was definitely upsetting, and I raced home today through traffic just to be on the show to do that. I'm pretty much done now. You guys have fun.
Very nice. Ryan Phillips in mid-season form in the offseason. Always great to see. Will, do you have a stat of the offseason?
I do, and Ryan, don't send the mafia at me, but that rant was better than advertised. And speaking of better than advertised, this book here, the stat of the, well, I guess show, I don't know, off-season, I don't know what to call it. But 226, that's the amount of pages in this awesome book that we have here. Started out as an ebook, it's now in print. It's even better in print. And like Andy said, you know, it's kind of like that time of the year where not a lot of sports are going on. I mean, you only can watch so much baseball. So, I mean, and we're all Hoosier fans here. So why not pick up this book? I think, Jared, you said it's coming out July 13th, available for sale.
Yes.
Right?
The ebook is available now at assemblycall.com/BTA. The print version will be available on Amazon for pre-order soon, and then it will start shipping on July 13th. So as soon as we have that link, you know that we will send you a message, let you know. Make sure you're on the email list at assemblycall.com/subscribe. But yes, it'll ship on the 13th, but it'll be available for pre-order soon.
See, I couldn't have said it any better myself. So, you know, go ahead, find some shade, get a glass of lemonade, and read this book. I'm just going through it. It's just so cool to just see the ups and downs of, you know, the season that was. And, you know, Andy's looking ahead, but I'm going to look back a little bit because that was a special season, and let's not forget about it just yet. But, yeah, 226. It's not that, you know, that daunting of a read, and you're a Hoosier fan, so you're never daunted. So go ahead and pick up this book when it comes out.
Yeah, and if I may say so myself, it's great for bathroom reading. You know, you go in there, you want to relive a game, your favorite game from last year, you can do it in a few minutes. It's great.
Hey, Jared, can I share a story really, really quick? I apologize, but you said
sure.
bathroom reading. Come on. All right. So I was just at a friend's house this past weekend for lunch, and I'm, you know, doing my business, you know, and I look up, and there's a picture of Bobby Knight, you know, he's all just staring at me. And I mean, that was motivation just to get out of there. But then I saw a picture of Steve Alford, who you mentioned earlier. It's just kind of cool to, you know, I didn't even notice I was in the IU bathroom, just kind of zoning out, but it's kind of cool, not going to lie. So
that is the strangest anecdote that we've ever had on the assembly call.
Absolutely nowhere. I'm sorry, Phil. What?
You melted heartstrings with that one.
What they should do is they should put pictures of posters of Bobby Knight in Purdue bathrooms, because nothing makes a boiler crap faster than the sight of Bobby Knight.
See, there we go. This got somewhere.
Okay, so before the show goes off the rails, it is time to bring in our special guest. And Kent, I didn't prepare you for this, but we figured, you know, what better way for you to open up on the assembly call than with a special assembly call top 10?
Good Lord.
I'm just messing with you. I'm messing with you. Of course, folks who follow Kent's blog know he does these regular top 10s. Now I'm wishing I had prepared you with a great top 10, but seriously, it's great to have you on. It's been so much fun being a part of your show, and we're just really, really happy to have you on ours and be able to share some of your insights with our audience. So welcome.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I thought that a top 10 list would make writing every morning a little bit easier. Oddly, it does not. It makes it, in fact, much more difficult. But because the top 10, what I used to write just a column used to be 600 to 700 words, and the top 10s easily eclipse 1,000 every morning. So I'm just writing away and finding more ways to have to work harder and harder.
Do you catch a lot of flack for those? I mean, obviously, when you have to fill 10 every time, sometimes you go, a little bit extreme with some, and you're kind of throwing stuff out there, and it's kind of entertaining. But I always wonder, kind of, does he really believe this, or is he, kind of putting stuff, out there? How do you fill all 10 of those?
Well, sometimes I'll do 7, sometimes I'll do 12. I mean, I don't hold myself strictly to the form. But everything that I say on the radio show, everything that I write is exactly what I think. Yeah. I used to manage radio programming departments for sports talk and news talk radio. And one of the things that I would tell talent all the time, there are 4 qualities of a great radio show. Relevance, fun, innovation, and then authenticity is the most important. And if you're not authentic, you're going to lose listeners. You're going to lose any trust that you've built with listeners. Your brand is going to be diminished. So if I'm guilty of anything, it's being maybe too authentic, but I never just fill. I always believe what I write, which is, I know, sometimes hard to believe.
Yeah, no. And I misspoke a little bit there. I was thinking more, like the one that you did, you talked about the Pacers filling their head coaching position, and you had Tom Crean on there. And I think a lot of people looked at that and kind of thought, well, it's not like there had been any legitimate talk about Tom Crean. So I think some people thought as maybe throwing something up against the wall, but you actually made a good case for it. That's what made it interesting.
I was trying to start that talk that had not somehow developed and sort of metastasized. At that point, look, Tom Crean is a coach that I have always felt just was an ill fit, a good coach, but an ill fit at Indiana. But I think that somehow over the past year, his behavior sort of shifted, and so I'm not kind of singing from that hymnal as much anymore. But I thought you look at a guy like Billy Donovan, you look at the guys who Brad Stevens came from Butler, went to the Celtics, and now everybody thinks that Brad Stevens is a genius. Billy Donovan takes the Thunder to within a couple of games of taking down the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals. Why not Tom Crean? Why wouldn't somebody discuss him as a potential head coaching candidate for an NBA franchise? And in the beginning, I thought, well, isn't that funny? But the more I thought about it, well, it's not so funny, and so I did include it in the list.
Well, and look, I mean, if Indiana continues, kind of the ascension that we've started to see, because it does seem like things are stabilizing a little bit, maybe that'll happen. For the time being, he's here at Indiana, and as you mentioned, you've been somewhat critical of him, somewhat unsure if he's the right fit. And I know you and I have talked about on your show that it looked like things started to change a little bit last year. Are you buying in now? Or are you still in wait-and-see mode? What's kind of your current stance on Crean at IU?
When I saw the video of him at the Huber Winery down in Starlight, Indiana, where, they're always hosting IU this, IU that, and they had Crean and a few of the players, and Tom just sort of behaved. Instead of trying to sell, I mean, he was always selling and always looking at you like too intently as he extolled the virtues of Indiana basketball and his contribution to it, maybe a little bit too aggressively. And in that thing, he was just kind of relaxed, and he was talking about IU and the team and the players in a way that I kind of vibed with, in a way that I hadn't before. And I kind of credit Fred Glass for the development of Tom Crean as a mature kind of adult man, in the same way that I think Fred Glass has sort of steered Kevin Wilson toward a saner lifestyle and a saner methodology of dealing with the media, dealing with his players, dealing with alums, dealing with everybody. I think that Fred has kind of coached these guys into becoming really they didn't come in as great fits. Now I think they've become better fits, and I don't think that that's my behavior or my appraisal. I think that that's an accurate depiction of who these guys are and how they've kind of evolved.
Have you softened your stance at all on the Tom Crean, Thomas Bryant hug?
Well, I think that was just disturbing. Frankly, it was. I don't get it. I don't understand a kid putting himself in that position. I don't understand an adult authority figure in a kid's life putting himself in that position. I don't think it was done out of any kind of creepy malice, but I don't understand a world in which that kind of emotional coddling immediately after a loss is necessary. Either I don't understand well the kid, or I don't understand. If you do it behind closed doors, if you're over there, away from the media, then I'm all with it. That's fine. Whatever you have to do to support emotionally a kid who's kind of hurting and is in a little bit of emotional trouble, I'm good. But to do it in front of cameras for a period of time like that, what I heard was it was close to 5 minutes. And that's just, to me, a little bit weird. But, I don't think anybody had a gun to either of their heads to participate in the thing. So maybe I'm just looking at it too hard, and I'm kind of examining on a granular basis Tom Crean's behavior to see if I can find something I don't like.
Yeah. One of the kind of the big elements about our show is that we are, Indiana fans talking about Indiana basketball, and often we're optimistic and supportive. Sometimes we're critical when it calls for it, but ultimately, I think underneath everything, we really care about IU basketball, and that's one of the reasons why I've always liked listening to you. Why I like doing your show, because you will be critical of IU basketball, but in your heart, you like IU basketball.
Right.
You want to see Indiana basketball succeed. And I think maybe it'll be interesting here, just for some context. What is your history with IU basketball? Did you grow up cheering for the Hoosiers? Kind of take us back.
I was a freshman in 80-81, so they won the national championship my freshman year. Yeah, it was a pretty good, pretty auspicious start to my college fandom. I went to New Albany High School in Southern Indiana. I was more a Louisville fan probably in high school than I was an Indiana fan. But I liked the way Indiana played basketball. I like emotion offense. I like man-to-man defense. I like a coach who's going to say, you know what, we're not going to trick it up. I'm going to show you exactly what we're going to do to try to beat you, and then we're going to execute it so well that you can't stop us. I liked that there was a bit of swagger and arrogance about Indiana basketball that I really liked without knowing and without psychoanalyzing Bob Knight. At least when I was young. 86 was my last year, so I missed the 87 championship by a year. But if you were an Indiana student who liked sports back in the early mid-'80s, you were all about basketball, because Indiana, other than soccer, sucked at everything else. And so enjoying basketball, and the basketball players were cool, right? I mean, they showed up at parties, and you had a good time with those guys. I mean, Dan Dockich was at all kinds of Uwe Blop, Marty Simmons, Todd Meyer. You saw these guys at parties all the time, and so you felt this connection to them. They were very well marketed in that they attended a lot of parties.
Wait, I thought all IU basketball players before Tom Crean didn't drink and never got in trouble.
Yeah, what are you talking about, Ken?
They may never have gotten in trouble, but I think that was all taken care of behind closed doors somehow or another. They belonged in trouble, but they were good, like social guys. So we loved Indiana basketball, and as they went through what they went through in the 2000s. I was either the assistant program director or the program director for the flagship of Indiana University football and basketball. Got to know what was going on within the program, really lamented the Mike Davis era, and then Kelvin Sampson. I was probably one of the first people who knew that Kelvin Sampson was being hired. We had a meeting with Indiana University Athletics, and Tim Fitzpatrick said, "We got our guy. You can't release it yet." And I said, "Who?" And he said, "Kelvin Sampson." And I wanted to convey a positive response just to be polite, but I knew who Kelvin Sampson was, and I knew the kind of trouble he had brought to Oklahoma, and I knew that he was probably on his way out anyway, and I didn't understand the hire, and I really thought that at that point Rick Greenspan and the people that Indiana had brought in to head up the athletic department were completely disconnected from the needs of Indiana University, and I became very jaded about what was going on. And then Sampson, as you know, was well documented, self-immolated, and you wind up hiring Tom Crean out of need. And so who are you going to get? I was all behind Tom Crean as a guy who, what are you going to do? You don't have a roster. You're going to hire somebody who's going to willingly accept that position. Somebody, one of the elite coaches in college basketball. And Tom did all the right stuff in the beginning, kind of befriended all the right people in AAU circles, high school circles in the state of Indiana. And through the period of time when sort of the movement wound up kind of spinning out of control, I liked it because I thought that Tom Crean was doing what was necessary to recruit Indiana. And I think that the nexus point for success at Indiana University in terms of basketball is recruiting successfully Indiana as part of your brand. It's not going to supply great basketball players every single year, but when it's deep, you get the Indiana kids. If you've got an Indiana All-Star kid or team where those guys kind of grow up dreaming of playing for Indiana and they see that as an extension of their basketball existence, you can win national championships. And after the movement, I really saw them kind of abandon ship on recruiting Indiana, and that's where I got a little bit peevish about Tom Crean and his contribution potentially to hanging a sixth banner.
Do you have any insight into why that happened? Why maybe they abandoned it and went out east? Because obviously they've gotten good recruits. I mean, even the year after the movement, his highest recruiting class was the one with Vonleh that, really kind of petered out. Do you know why that happened?
I've talked to high school coaches in the area, and he kind of burned bridges with high schools. I think he's in the process of trying to make reparations to those high school coaches. I think that there are years, and maybe 2000, as I'm trying to remember them, 2014 might be a pretty good example where Indiana wasn't quite as good as you would like to get an influx of talent if you're going to be an elite program. But Indiana is never going to be able to recruit at the level nationally as a Kentucky or a Duke or a North Carolina or a Kansas. It's just not the way it works, and it never has. You've got to be able to recruit Indiana. Maybe there's some stuff behind closed doors I don't know about. I think he's done the right thing in the class of 2017. I think that Chris Wilkes, Paul Scruggs, those guys look very favorably on Indiana. Jaren Jackson, maybe, and there are some kids in Fort Wayne who are pretty good. In 18, I know Romeo Langford is high in Indiana, and Romeo Langford's the best high school basketball player I've ever seen ever. And from a demeanor standpoint, a physical standpoint, the ability to shoot, handle in traffic, defend, rebound, this kid is absolutely the real deal, and Indiana has got to be a place that he covets. And if you can get there, then you can win national championships. And I think that that's got to be the mandate from Indiana fans for Tom Crean moving forward. He's got to be able to recruit Indiana. Love Juwan Morgan, love OG Anunoby, but Missouri isn't the place from which you're going to birth national championship teams.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, did you want to hop in with a point on recruiting?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think that Ken is right. I think that after the movement kind of fell apart, some coaches in Indiana were a little peeved that Indiana hadn't gone harder after some other players. Some other coaches, who were responsible for the guys who did show up on campus and felt like they didn't get a shot, were also a little ticked off. And I think that it was just for Indiana, it was more comfortable to back off and go national. It also has to do with their assistants. A few of their assistants have better ties in other places than they do in Indiana, or did at least for a few years. And now I think that there is a real push from them to turn it back around and be a program that locks down the state of Indiana to a certain degree, and then can poach other guys from around the country, as opposed to the other way around, where you grab an Indiana guy and fill out the roster, like we saw this year with Gilon being really the only Indiana guy that was added to the roster. That's a classic Indiana player.
Yeah, I guess so. My question for you, Ken, along the same lines is, so we talked about how you've come around a little bit on Crean. I think there are a lot of people in the same boat that are still just trying to kind of figure out how they view him, and maybe aren't quite ready to go all in. I'd probably potentially put myself in that bucket. But so what do you think it takes? Is it, I think recruiting is a piece of it. Talking about all these Indiana kids coming up, I know that's high on everybody's radar. There's also the postseason performance, to a lesser extent Big Ten tournament performance, but there's how do you get to that second weekend and those things like that. I mean, what do you think it takes to get people to that point where some of these things don't linger over his head, because I think if they can't get to that point and those things are always out there, then it always feels like at some point you're never going to win those people over, and what are you really going to be? And that's where Fred Glass may eventually be in a tough position to, make a decision about his future, based on things like that, where just, at a certain point, if you haven't won people over, you're not going to. But what do you think kind of gets him over the next hurdle with fans?
I think he's doing exactly the right thing, and that's being himself. For all of Bob Knight's warts, Bob Knight has always been Bob Knight. And the comparison between Tom Crean and Bob Knight is not fair necessarily, but nobody wants Bob Knight back. Nobody wants a coach who misbehaved like Bob Knight did. I don't think anybody's pining for those days, but what we do want is an authentic guy. We were talking about the need to be authentic in radio, and the need to be authentic as a coach, I think, is really, really strong in Indiana. And there was a sense from the time that Tom Crean got here that he was selling us on Tom Crean, and that any opportunity he had to take center stage and espouse the virtues of Tom Crean, he enthusiastically embraced those circumstances. And I don't think the people in Indiana vibe with that kind of thing. I don't think people here enjoy being sold. And so you wound up with a guy he embraced himself so fervently that there was no room for us to embrace him, and I think that was a little bit off-putting. He's also in a position where for 29 years, one thing that Bob Knight did exceptionally well is he trained coaches, high school coaches, and fans as to how basketball needed to be played and the Indiana way to play basketball. So Indiana fans have a really good working knowledge of how the game is played. And when a coach kind of tries to obfuscate, when he makes a strategic decision that just fails for one reason or another. And I go back to this one. I go back to IU playing against Wisconsin at Assembly Hall, and Crean pulled. What did he do? He pulled Noah Vonleh and replaced him with Austin Etherington to defend Kaminsky, because Kaminsky liked to shoot threes. Well, Bo Ryan countered by feeding the ball to Kaminsky on the block. Etherington had to foul. They gave up a three-point play. It was ridiculous. It was rudimentary basketball strategy, and the way Tom Crean tried to explain it just kind of didn't hold water. And when you do that in Indiana, you lose a lot of respect and a lot of really kind of the reverence that position should generate. And I think that's part of the thing, that Tom Crean's got to recognize the people in Indiana know basketball, and then he's got to recognize that we vibe with a guy who's just who he is. And those are like Matt Painter is Matt Painter always. Brad Stevens was Brad Stevens always. It's not that they're basketball geniuses. It's not that they're great recruiters. It's not that they're incredibly successful. I mean, Brad has had his works too, but those guys were just who those guys are. And with Tom Crean, I'm supposing that he's kind of embracing the notion that he has to be who he is. I think he's got a chance at Indiana.
Yeah. It's so interesting because there's an irony there in that, it's kind of felt like he's operated from a sense of defensiveness some, which started to change last year, no question, because it's almost like he felt like he was always being compared to Bob Knight and that people weren't accepting him despite all of the wins, and yet, so that's kind of causing him to not be himself and maybe oversell himself, and yet that's also keeping the fans at arm's length a little bit.
Yeah, that was the irony of the whole situation. I don't think that Tom Crean pales in comparison necessarily to Bob Knight, but I don't think that existing in Bob Knight's universe as somebody who sells himself aggressively was a good tactic for Tom Crean. And I think that Fred Glass has coached him off that. Yeah. And now, so I watch Crean, like I said, at Huber's, and I think, oh, well, that's a pretty good guy. I'm all right with this guy.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we see that continue this season because it'll be huge in the future development of the program. Let's talk a little bit about the program's immediate recent past. Yogi Ferrell, for really interesting years at Indiana. They weren't all successful. Some of them certainly were successful. How do you assess his legacy as a Hoosier now that his career is over?
You know what? It's as a guy who was very competent in leading that team to a distinguished place, but not a place of greatness. So is he one of the all-time greats at Indiana? Despite being the all-time assists leader, all-time games played leader, I don't think so. I think you have to attach your name to a banner to be considered one of the all-time greats at IU. But at the same time, I don't think he's got anything to be ashamed of either. I think that we saw Yogi Ferrell. To me, his legacy is this. He came in as a freshman with some behaviors that needed to be massaged, and he needed to mature. And over his time at IU, from his freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, he matured and matured and matured and matured, just as kids are supposed to do in college. And so I think that his legacy at Indiana is his development as a young man and not necessarily as a basketball player. And I think that that's what college is there for, right? That's what Tom Crean is supposed to do, help in the educational process of the young man. And I think that Yogi Ferrell really benefited from that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we talk about that a lot on this show. Obviously, we want to win as many games as possible, but there's a reason why people cheer so hard for their college sports program as opposed to, in addition to, but, there's a difference between college and professional sports, and I think sometimes we lose sight of that. In juxtaposing now, the nonsense that's going on with Baylor, where it looks like they might consider keeping Art Briles just because they want to win football games, which is just a compromise that makes no sense to me. That's to me, what makes being a college sports fan fun is watching guys grow and develop over 4 years and seeing them have some warts and make some missteps like we all did in college and overcome them. Do you think sometimes as college sports fans that we forget about that we overlook that we need to be reminded of that?
You know what? I do, and thankfully I don't think that we do at Indiana.
Yeah.
I think at Indiana we see the athletic department as an extension of the university. And that we want to be as proud of the athletic department and its behavior, its comportment, as we are the university as a whole from an educational standpoint. And, what's going on with Baylor is such a travesty that I wish not the NCAA as an institution. I'm not talking about what Mark Emmert runs. I'm talking about the members of the NCAA. If they knuckle under to the boosters who write checks to that athletic department to suspend Briles for a year and then bring him back, the NCAA ought to convene and kick Baylor the hell out of their association, because they have no place being in an association that's bound together by the premise that athletics are an extension of education. I think it would just be heresy and so grotesque that I don't know if the NCAA as an institution could survive an evolution from where we perceive it to be today, which is, granted, there are some things that happen within college athletics, like what happened at Missouri, what happened at North Carolina, what happened at Louisville. It's not all, cupcakes and roses. But if Baylor willingly turns away from the victims of sexual abuse and toward a coach that allowed it and put into place a system that didn't punish athletes who behaved in that way and who committed those crimes, I don't know where we're headed as a society. At that point, you just kind of fold the tent. You say college athletics is a complete sham.
Yeah, and that's why I was so proud to see what Fred Glass did. Making a point of communicating to the folks in the athletic department that wouldn't be tolerated, and exactly what needed to happen. In the event that any type of assault or anything was reported. I was really happy to see that. Andy, you had a follow up on the Yogi Ferrell topic.
Yeah, so kind of talking on-court stuff with Yogi, I think we're all, as we start to look toward next year, trying to figure out how to replace him, and I think that probably isn't a single player. I think there's different facets of what he brought to the table that need to be replaced. So I'm going to kind of throw out a few of those things and maybe give me your at least initial thoughts on who picks up that part of it. So I guess we'll start with maybe the less tangible thing in terms of leadership. Who do you think becomes, steps into those more leadership type roles on next year's team?
I think that's a great question, and I have no idea who the guy's going to be. But the key is that one guy has got to be that guy. Because 2 years ago, we kind of saw what happens when you have two leaders. When you have two leaders, you have none. Will Sheehy thought that he was the leader of that team. Yogi Ferrell thought that he was the leader of that team. And what you wound up with was a complete vacuum of leadership. What's got to happen is somebody has got to be anointed that guy, and that's got to be done by the roster. Somebody's got to take charge, and then the roster has got to respond, and they've got to follow that guy. And whether that's, I don't know whether Josh Newkirk is that guy or whether Rob Johnson's that guy or Thomas Bryant is a sophomore, I guess could kind of be that guy. Things seem to work a little bit better when it's the point guard, but I don't know whether every point guard kind of has that genetic proclivity toward leadership, and I have no idea. I didn't see Newkirk play enough at Pitt to have any semblance of an idea as to what kind of leader he is on the floor.
All right, so let's talk, I guess we'll kind of stick along the point guard. So let's talk kind of playmaker / distributor. Who steps into that role?
I hope it's Josh Newkirk because Rob turns the ball over a lot. And if Rob Johnson, I think if he's trusted with the offense and he doesn't take better care of the ball, I think that's going to be difficult. I think Blackman plays better off the ball as a catch-and-shoot guy. Other than that, I'm not sure who the candidates are to step out and be that conduit to get the offense going. So I hope it's Newkirk.
All right. What about three-point shooting? I think it's funny that lost a number of guys from last year's team that everybody shot the ball really well, but especially with Zysloff being gone, Bielfeldt could step out, and Yogi being gone. That's a lot of three-point shooting. But who steps in and makes some of those? I'm assuming you're going to say Blackman since you brought him up about shooting off the ball. But is there anybody else that jumps out at you in that regard?
There's Blackman, but I think Colin Hartman can be a really good shooter too. I think he's improved every year at his shot, and I think he's going to be better yet this coming year. I think he can be that guy, that kind of zone buster, that extender of the defense kind of guy. I hope he can. Other than that, I don't think that's kind of in Curtis Jones's kind of his toolbox. It doesn't sound like he's a great three-point shooter, that he's better kind of as a cutter and a slasher. I think it's going to be Hartman.
Okay. All right, last one. So obviously what got a lot of discussion last year was defense, and Yogi turned into one of the better perimeter defenders on the team and really one of the better ones in the league. Who kind of takes that role of I'm going to guard the opposing team's best backcourt player?
I think Rob Johnson is kind of the obvious choice, but I think the real wild card in the whole deal is that can James Blackman defend well enough to justify being on the floor? I mean, he's going to score points, but is he going to be able to defend well enough that he doesn't allow 1.3 points for every point he scores or that his offensive participation leads to? I think that's really kind of the crux of whether Indiana is going to be successful. And I know that Tom Crean and everybody associated with IU has said that the development of last year's team would have happened regardless of James Blackman Jr.'s injury. But the fact of the matter is that it occurred simultaneous to that injury. And so I hope that James is going to be able to defend a little bit better. I think it was always a health thing with him, that he was just unable to move laterally in the way you have to stay in front of the ball. I didn't see it was an effort thing or getting lost in transition type thing. I always thought it was kind of a physical thing. Hopefully he can kind of get past those physical restrictions that kept him from defending adequately in the past.
I sense a top 10 reasons why James Blackman Jr.'s defense is underrated from this time.
Yeah. Any ideas for top 10 lists are absolutely welcome.
Hey, so let me ask you about Thomas Bryant. Obviously, everybody's really excited about his sophomore season. It's always fun when you have a freshman that comes in with great expectations, really lives up to them, and in some ways even exceeds them, and then stays on campus. So you get him again, and you've got that whole offseason of just really anticipating what he will do. What do you expect from Thomas, and how do you kind of place him within the history of good, prodigiously good young IU big men?
You know, my expectations for Thomas Bryant completely changed, completely elevated as he played against Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. I thought that he was really good, and he elevated his game to the moment rather than being overwhelmed by the moment. And I was worried that as kind of an emotionally mercurial guy, that Thomas was going to have difficulty with that in that moment. I think that because he was able to play in that game at the level he did, I think this year he's going to be really, really good. And I think he's first team Big Ten type guy, and a guy who can kind of be the linchpin underneath to a very, very successful Indiana season, maybe another regular season Big Ten championship. And if he gets really good, then, you know, maybe an Elite Eight, maybe a Final Four. But I think they could be really good this year, and I think that he's as he goes, I think Indiana's going to go.
Now, in order to reach that Elite Eight and Final Four, we're going to need a couple other, pivotal role players on this team. So a couple episodes ago, we asked the question, who's going to be the most important player other than Thomas Bryant on this team? I'm not going to tell you who we discussed on that, but I want to know your opinion. Who do you think, other than Thomas Bryant, is going to have to be or in your opinion, who's going to be the most important player on the team?
I think Newkirk's the most important player if they trust him with the point guard spot, but I think that Juwan Morgan is really, really important. And if you kind of combine Juwan Morgan and OG Anunoby together as guys who can defend, rebound, and then score the basketball a little bit, I think that those guys are absolutely critical. I think Deron Davis and Curtis Jones. I think one of the things that's going to be really tough, and I know we talked about this on the show the other day, but it's keeping everybody happy from a minutes perspective. I mean, they've got an 11-man rotation where you could play all those guys and may have to play all those guys, and I think that that's Tom Crean's biggest challenge. But I really think that it's kind of a combination of Juwan Morgan and OG Anunoby, and if those guys take that leap from front, I had no expectations for those guys. I thought they just had extra scholarships to throw at people, and they knew that with empty scholarships you can't win games, so let's put some guys in the seats and see what happened. Kind of a Tim Priller sort of situation from the year prior. But those guys could play, and I think that OG Anunoby is potentially terrific, and I think Juwan Morgan too. Those are both guys that, when they signed Victor Oladipo, everybody was like, Victor, who, what? But if you talk to Victor Oladipo, and I did that summer before his freshman year, you got the sense that this was a serious-minded dude who knew where he was headed, and he knew how to get there. I get that same sense with both Anunoby and Morgan.
I agree, and I'm glad you brought that up because the two of those guys remind me a lot of Oladipo and Sheehy, who no one really made a big deal when they committed, but they really became the heart and soul of the program because of their confidence, despite lower rankings, and because of their ability and their work ethic. I still have this coaster I made, Sheila Depot, as you can see, and I'm thinking Juwan Anunoby may be the new twosome, because I think those guys can be the heart and soul of the program, and that's why I'm so excited about that recruiting class, because you don't expect Thomas Bryant to be around after next year, and maybe not OG either, depending on how he progresses. But Morgan is the type of 4-year player that that teams like Michigan State have, that seem to get better every year, and by the time he's a senior, he becomes an all Big Ten level player. And I think, especially with him, his versatility on defense is going to be so important next year, because he can guard out to the perimeter if you need him to, and that's a huge weapon to have. So it's funny, those were two guys we didn't mention, so I'm pretty sure we've now covered every player on the roster as the potential key to next year's team, which I think shows A, the lack of maybe the clear leader, but B, the incredible depth that this team has. And what do you think about that? Because it's kind of a blessing and a curse for Tom Crean, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he manages it next year.
I think it's really difficult to keep 11 really good players happy. I've seen AAU teams with an 11-deep bench, and it's always the first 8 guys, that's one core unit, and then you've got the guys at the end of the bench who kind of get dissatisfied, and they can turn against the program and the process. I think it's really hard to keep more than 8 happy. That's going to be Tom Crean's biggest challenge. What I love about you, Jared, and your guys, is the brand extension stuff, the accoutrements that are available for sale. You've got the coasters, you've got the books, you got a little bit of everything you guys sell. You guys are going to make millions.
Well, and here's the thing. So we do actually have Assembly Call coasters for sale. So I am glad that you said that. You can go to assemblycall.com/gear. Unfortunately, like this Sheila Depot coaster, we can't actually sell this. I don't know if we can just because of the rights, because of the images and the players. Like I've got a mug with Christian Watford's shot that I made, and I have sent that out as gifts to people, like people who win our, NCAA tournament bracket challenge. I would love to be able to sell that and then give the proceeds to the players themselves, but I don't want to get our show in trouble, so I've never actually sold that stuff.
Jared, dare people
That's true.
Write cease and desists, and then when you get a cease and desist, make copies of that, put that on a coaster, sell those, and dare people to sue.
That idea right there is better than advertised. Ryan?
The man is a genius. The man is a genius.
It's a great idea. Great idea. So, a couple quick hit questions for you. Who's your favorite player in IU history? Just the guy that you enjoyed watching the most.
Wow, that is a great question. You know what? The guy whose influence over a team I respect best, so I'll pivot it a little bit, was Isaiah Thomas in 1981, because that was a team that was really having trouble, and they were kind of mired in their own little dysfunction. They were 7-5 at one point, and really kind of going nowhere. And then all of a sudden, what we found out, as we've heard stories about it, is that Bob Knight just kind of said, "Okay, Isaiah, you take this thing, go." And as soon as he did that, that switch flipped, and they became the best team in the country, bar none, and it was easy. They walked through the NCAA tournament. They won the NCAA tournament game by, I think, 13, but they crushed in the opening round a really good Maryland team, just beat their brains in. And I talked to Steve Risley, who is a member of that team, a senior on that team, about it a few weeks ago on the show, and he was saying that he thought that that was the best any Indiana team has played in any game that he's seen. That opening round game against Maryland was phenomenal, but I think Isaiah Thomas was such a talent and a killer, that I think he infused a personality into that program during that season, his sophomore year in 80-81, that left them kind of no room to do anything but hang a banner. And so that was the most fun, because I think you saw sort of the way they were and what they became, and then you heard the stories after about how it happened. And I think that Isaiah Thomas just kind of figured out how to make that team winners, and he did it.
But that's one of those really unique, interesting matches of player and coach that you could see going one of two ways. You could see it totally imploding, but you don't often associate the word humility with Bob Knight, but it really took a lot of humility for him to do that and realize it was in the best interest of the team.
Bob Knight was all about winning.
Yeah.
And Bob Knight, he gets so much, I think, blame for being sort of a blustery force on the bench, because what do we see? We see him headbutt Sharon Wilkerson a million times on highlights. He kicks his kid in the shin. There was I think he slapped Butch Carter in the face. There were all these kind of indiscretions that he authored, but during games he sat down and he was quiet and he watched the game, especially in the month of March. He was really good at watching the game and being inspiring. I know we don't think about Bob Knight in those terms too often, but being inspiring to the roster and putting them in a great position to be successful, both individually and as a team. And I think that kind of gets lost in the backwash of all the hysteria.
Who gets drafted? Who's more likely to get drafted, Yogi Ferrell or Troy Williams?
I would be much more likely to draft Yogi. If Tyler Eulis is worth somebody taking a flyer in the 20s, I think that Yogi Ferrell is too. I think that Yogi's quick. He's bigger than Tyler Eulis. He can flat shoot. He's going to work out for the Pacers on Friday. That's going to be interesting to see. But I really think that Yogi Ferrell, as a backup point guard or as a third point guard on a roster, it could very easily justify a second-round draft pick. Troy Williams, my problem with Troy Williams is that I've never seen him play in a way that gave me the idea that he understood the game. I think he's a splendid athlete. He's long. He can rebound. He's a strong kid. His measurables, I thought he was much longer than he measured at the combine. I was really surprised by that. But I think his lack of a basketball IQ would really hamper him at the next level. I think he's destined either for the NBDL or to play in Europe and have a successful career there.
What's your favorite kind of underrated IU memory, right? Like, it's too easy to say the Watt shot against Kentucky, those kind of memories. Like, for me, it's being at Assembly Hall when Calvert Chaney broke the Big Ten's all-time scoring record, because it was just this beautiful moment. What is that for you? Do you have an IU memory like that that's just really personal to you, whether you were there or not?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. You know, I don't think it's for me, well, okay, this is more about me, but I used to sneak into practice. You know, Assembly Hall was always kind of open, and Bob Knight, during the time I was at IU, he opened one of them to fans where they could come in and watch a practice. And then I think everybody kind of figured out why they didn't want to go to practice, because it was kind of tedious. But I like to walk into Assembly Hall, go into the balcony, and kind of sneak in and watch over the rail and see how Bob Knight was running things during practice. I don't think you're able to do that anymore. In fact, I'm certain that you're not. But, you know, it was just that, kind of being a fly on the wall and watching those teams work.
And speaking of Assembly Hall, where are you on the Assembly Hall renovations? Are you excited? Are you worried that it'll kind of take away some of the tradition and charm? What are your thoughts?
I'm really good with it. I think that Fred does a very good job, and that's why, I mean, we talk about the need for an IU guy this or an IU guy that. Well, I think it's important to have an athletic director who's an IU guy so he understands the need to evolve the building but not destroy the aura of the building. You know, you've got to respect kind of the spine of the facility and then build off the spine of the building. And I think that that's what Fred's doing. I think that it was time for an update. You know, certainly, I think that they made the right decision, whether it was financially based or whether it was kind of a nod to tradition and history, to upgrade the building rather than raise it and replace it. But I'm kind of excited about it, and I think that closing the south end of the end zone at the football stadium, another great student-athlete focused enhancement to the athletic facility. But I'm looking forward to seeing a kind of an upgraded Assembly Hall, although I got to tell you, it was cool to walk into a building and have it be exactly the same as it was when you were a student some 30 years later. I mean, that was kind of right down to the tile on the floor. That red stuff with the kind of raised circles,
yeah,
that was there forever. Those seats have been there since it opened. You know, so it has been kind of cool. But I think it was time for an upgrade, an evolution towards something a little more modern.
Yeah, a few more ads, a bigger scoreboard, but otherwise pretty much
Right.
exactly the same. So, you know, Ken, one of the reasons you and I really connected, I mean, several years ago, is, you know, is kind of our interest in new media and kind of the new ways that there are for folks who want to build a platform and have a voice, to not wait to be asked and not wait for permission, but just to do it, which is kind of how we've done it with the Assembly Call, and, you know, and you've been doing that as well. You know, where are some of the best places for folks to connect with you, and what's next for you, and what kind of plans do you have, and you know, what all is on the horizon?
You know, I'm real busy, which is great. I like being busy, so I think I've got kind of all the portals checked. I want to become better at what I do, and I mean I do a breakfast video every morning. It's Breakfast with Kent, and the reason I do that is so I get a little bit better on camera. I mean, when I'd go on Fox 59 with Chris Hagan, especially the first time, I just looked awkward and like I didn't understand what was happening, and it was all very, like, to watch back was just torturous, and so I wanted to get better at it. I wanted to become a better writer, and I know that the way to become a better writer is to write all the time. So I write every day at kentsterling.com, and the people at Nuvo, they kind of purpose what I write on nuvo.net. Twitter is interesting. I guess I got to figure out, and I'm there at Kent Sterling, but I guess what I got to figure out is kind of what's next, and I want to have an idea of what that thing is, what that portal is. Like, I remember being at Emmis when I was a program director at 1070 The Fan and WIBC, and I put a bunch of interns, anybody 25 or under, I put in a room because I wanted to redesign our website in a way that people would be able to consume it and people would feel good about the experience of consuming it. So I've got all these people in a room, and I said, okay, here's our website. What do you think? And they're like, yeah, we don't do that. And oh, what do you do? They said, well, I said, how do you get news? And they said, Twitter. And I knew vaguely what it was, but I had no idea that people from 18 to 24 were just killing it on Twitter, and that's the way they got news. That's the way people found out everything first. Now, of course, we all know that, and we all take advantage of Twitter, both as consumers and conveyors of media. But what I want to figure out what the next thing is as it happens, and be kind of at the vanguard of what happens next. If I could do that, then I'd feel pretty good about where I am from a media perspective. But for me, like if I feel like I'm as good as I can get, whether it's at radio, whether it's at writing, whether it's on camera stuff or whatever, I stop enjoying. I get stagnant, and it's no fun for me. So what I'm going to evolve into is whatever is the most challenging thing down the road, because that's where the fun is for me.
So you're saying the virtual reality Kent Sterling show is on the horizon?
Yeah, I'm going to be available in hologram to sit on the couch and watch IU games with you.
So, I know that we have folks in our audience, because I've had conversations with them on Twitter, privately, and email, that that want to kind of do what we've done here, where it's just create a platform about something that you love, whether it's about IU basketball, about sports, about something else. And this is something that I do in my day job, and I love talking about it. But I'd really be interested to hear from you, for someone listening to this show right now who's maybe thought about, hey, I have thoughts on Indiana basketball that I want to say, or about the Colts, or whatever topic it may be. What kind of advice would you give to somebody just to get started?
You go, if you've got a MacBook Pro, that's wonderful. That's a great place to start. If you've got an iPhone, that's a great place to start. I select Apple stuff because I'm familiar with them, and that's what I do. But an iMac Pro or a MacBook Pro, an iPhone, it's got everything you need to be able to generate all the media that a TV station or a radio station. You've got Periscope, you've got Facebook Live, you have all these different apps that are available for you to share what you do and get good at it. Because I'll guarantee you, if you've never done it before, you think that you can host a radio show or a show like you guys have on Assembly Call. All I got to do, because it's kind of like George Costanza. I thought about being one of those analyst guys on Yankee games. I'm always talking about the Yankees, and Jerry said, well, Jerry rolls his eyes. You've got to get good at it, and you have to develop a mastery of it. And I don't think you necessarily need 10,000 hours, but you've got to get good enough to open a door at a radio station, a traditional media forum, to be able to kind of expand your brand reach a little bit. And to do that, you have to prove competence in new media, and you can do that through WordPress. You can do that Google Hangouts, which you guys utilize beautifully. What is it about this show that would keep? You've got the same production value, for God's sake, and we're at 720p, and that's plenty good resolution to be able to watch and enjoy. And all you need is a MacBook Pro to be able to do it, or like I've got with my iPhone. I bought a tripod today, so I can hook my iPhone to it. I saw Brian Windhorst do this, and Mark Stein do this. The ESPN guys do this. That's how they feed their material, is with an iPhone and a tripod. They got the mic plugged in with a mic flag, and they're talking to guys. You think there's a photog back there. There's no photog. They do it with their iPhone. If you've got an iPhone, you've got the keys to the castle. You just have to get good enough to be able to use it.
Yeah, it's great advice. So my last question for you, we got this question on Twitter, and it's from our friend Hoosier Artifacts, which is @IU Artifacts. One of my favorite accounts to follow on Twitter. Some of the stuff that gets tweeted from that account is awesome, just these old IU artifacts. But the question is, you should definitely ask Kent about some of his Little Five stories.
Okay.
I know they are legendary.
Oh, you know what? I don't have it right here. I wish I did. We printed credentials in 2007 and 2009, and to go down there, and we were a little bit long in the tooth at that point, and people down in Bloomington, they really don't, once you hit 40, they don't question you. They think you're a well-heeled booster, and so we had these credentials I had printed, and they look like real things. We had lanyards, And we didn't want to pay the $15 or $20 to walk in. Plus, we would bring gallon jugs of screwdrivers in with us, 2 per person, and we'd kind of have a party up there in turn 1, and now it's turned into turn 4. But the first year we did it, I went to Nick's. And all we've got is, I put it on because why wouldn't you have it on? I thought the lanyards looked cool and the credentials looked cool. And it said that we were special provosts. I don't even know what a provost is, but we were special provosts. And so we're at Nick's, and a guy walks up to us and says, hey, well, where'd you get those credentials? And I said, we're donors to the university, and so they called, asked us if we wanted to come down, provided them for us. And I said, yeah, we're donors. And he said, well, I'm a donor. And I kind of got quiet, and I leaned into him, and I said, yeah, we build buildings. And he looked like this shame and sadness came over his face. That's probably my favorite moment. But in 2009, the second time we did this, we show the credentials. We've got our gallon jugs of screwdrivers, and the guy taking tickets, I was scared out of my mind. Well, I thought, my God, I'm a professional person. If I get arrested for this stuff, it's going to be in News of the Weird. It's going to be all over the place. It's going to be, my family's going to have to live in shame. We're going to have to leave the state. But anyway, we get there and show him the credential, and we've got the jugs, and he looks at us and goes, oh, you guys have to go around the building to that special gate. They had a special gate for us, which I thought was really, really nice. I don't know what they thought was in the orange juice, the giant gallon jugs of orange juice, but they never messed with us. We've always had a great time at Little 500. We've cashed in our chips. We're never going to go again because I think that I've made too much of it. But, yeah, printing credentials for ourselves at Little 500 and kind of being through that skullduggery, kind of given the keys to the event, I think was just the greatest.
That is excellent. That is excellent. Well, we, as we wind down here, we always have our tradition on the assembly call of everybody going around and giving their last call. But after those stories, we all agree that you deserve the final thought on tonight's show. And so I'll lead you into it with this question as we bring things back to IU basketball, which is our bread and butter here on the assembly call. But as you look forward to next season, obviously we know there's a lot of talent. There are going to be a lot of expectations. What are your expectations for Indiana basketball in 2016-17?
I think the expectations should always be that the team finds a way to play to its potential. And if the team, if they're as good as we think they might be, at some point that's got to be advancing beyond the Sweet 16. In a one-and-done tournament, that's really, really tough. It's hard to hold the coach accountable to advancement in the NCAA tournament. And if you want a great example of that, it's Jay Wright at Villanova, right? I don't know if they've made it out of the second round since 2009 before they won it this past year. But at some point, Indiana basketball is going to have to find a way to succeed in the month of March in a meaningful way under Tom Crean, or the calls for somebody else coming in and, repivoting that program where it can do the things that are necessary to make it worth our while to continue to watch in the ways we do and invest our energy and our money in that program. I think that's the thing. I'm not saying a sixth banner, but you've got to show an ability to advance in March in a way that they haven't.
Yeah. Excellent insight, Kent. Thank you so much for joining us. It's
my pleasure.
It's been great having you on here, and like I said, fun turning the tables on you. And then next time we chat, it'll be back to normal, and you'll be the one asking me the questions.
Thanks. I'm a big fan of you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kent. You can follow him at Kent Sterling. Go to kentsterling.com. Great insight about all Indiana sports there. And thank you very much for listening, and we will talk to you all on the next episode of the Assembly Call. See you soon, everybody.